I live in Ra'anana, as you've heard, with my Australian-born husband, Danny, who's here with me today. I'm also here with my trusted colleague of many, many years, Zohar Landau, who I consider to be one of the best lawyers in Israel and a great confidant. Danny and I have two beautiful girls, Galia and Ella. They're 18 and 17 years old. Danny's a philanthropist who promotes shared society through sports and education for the last 20 years, and he's also a director of our foundation, the Azrieli Foundation. Galia, our daughter, is currently doing a year of national service. What does that mean? It's a year before the army, where she's working with special needs, handicapped adults and youth before she starts the army. And Ella is finishing high school, and she's also going to do a year of pre-army leadership and study, a program that's known in Israel. I was born in Montreal, as you've heard, in June 1967. Why is that relevant? Because it was exactly when the Six-Day War was about to begin. My mother always says, I came into the world when the radio was blasting news about Israel, and the doctors were more interested in the headlines about Israel than about my birth. I always say it was an excellent beginning because it forced me into being a very resilient and independent character from my first breath, since no one was paying much attention to me, and it forever focused me on the success of the State of Israel. My family was a Zionist family through and through, which means that we were and remain committed to the success of a Jewish homeland. We must have a place we call home, a place where we stop being visitors, dependent on the generosity or acceptance of another people in another people's land. When I grew up, Friday night Shabbat dinners were a time of memorable singing and intergenerational conversation. I try to do the same thing with my family today. But most relevant to share with you today is that my father, who survived the Holocaust by running one step ahead of the advancing Nazi forces, and then he made it to Palestine in 1942 through a series of incredible adventures. Occasionally, on these Friday night dinners, he would agree to share with us snippets of stories about how he lived. He would tell us who helped him, how he managed to make a decision. And I would hold on to these stories, these little bits of pieces of information about his past, about my family, like bits of air. I wanted to know everything about how he survived, because it was in total contrast to how I was growing up in Montreal. You see, I lived in a very comfortable Montreal Jewish community. And at that time, in those years, unlike today, which is incredible that I need to say this now, there was nothing to fear. But in the oddest times and in the most inopportune places, I can, and I probably have always, suddenly I would start imagining myself like a survivor. I'd imagine myself running through a small town, trying to find a place to hide. Or I'd wonder, who's going to help me? I'd wonder, where will I go? How will I manage? Will I be smart enough to find my way? Will I be lucky enough? Could I be clever enough to get somebody to help me? Sometimes it's only about turning left or turning right. Will I know which way to turn? Apparently, I'm not so different from other second-generation children who grew up around survivors. But to walk around with this type of survivor narrative constantly in the back of my mind, it's not so simple. So over the years, I've tried to use it as a gift in my life. I've tried to have it push me to succeed. I'm super vigilant. It's like a gift. I use it for all my emotional intelligence in my personal and business life, because at any moment, I think, everything can get taken away, or something can happen. And of course, understanding this second-generation anxiety and thinking about it, and then thinking about what did happen in Israel on October 7th, this becomes almost too much to bear. But of course, there's no comparison between now and then because we have Israel. And that's the main difference. Because on October 7th, we were invaded in the south. And while it did take a long time for the army to show up, we do have an army. And in Hebrew we say, Ein lanu eretz acheret. We have no other land which we can call our own. But we have to continue to be strong. But my main message today, more than any other message, is that we have to work harder to be a more unified Jewish people in order to prevent such catastrophes from happening again. And let me explain why this is my message. When I moved to Israel in July 2000, it was at the height of the Oslo peace process. I was filled with hope. It was a turning point in the history of the Middle East and for the Jewish people. But before I do that, in order to understand the psyche, the psychology of Israel today, I think it's important to go through a bit of the history. A quick review. In the years leading up to 2000, there were many acts of terrorism, including the assassination of Rabin in 1995 by a right-wing Jewish extremist, but the Israeli left stayed committed to the peace process. In the year 2000, when Oslo failed and the Second Intifada brought terrorism instead of peace, it basically brought an end to the Israeli left at that time. The Israeli left felt that they had been willing to go all the way for peace and realized they didn't have a partner with whom they can go the distance. In the time that followed, Ariel Sharon's Likud government, in a decision that was later ratified by the Israeli Supreme Court, voted to unilaterally withdraw the Jewish settlers from Gaza in 2005. The idea was to let the Palestinians manage themselves and no longer be stuck on the ideology of settlements there. The decision of the unilateral withdrawal also tore the country apart. Then, after a short while, Hamas got rid of the PA and they took over the Gaza Strip. So there were two ruling parties. There was one in the West Bank, the Palestinian Authority, and one in Gaza, Hamas. Now, Hamas ruled Gaza with a terrorist agenda ideologically based on destroying Israel. And for the last 20 years, they built an education system, educating their young, supported by the UN, implemented by UNRWA, which basically educated a generation of young Palestinians to hate Israel with a passion. It is in these last 20 years that the Israelis have lived with Hamas along its border on the south and believed that Hamas could be pacified by economic stability in place of its deadly ideology to destroy the Jewish state, and that we in Israel today are mistakenly calling the conceptia. Have you guys heard of this word? In Israel today, there's a thing we're all calling the conceptia, the concept. It's basically the idea that Israel was living with a concept, the conceptia, that there was a willful blindness to what was happening in Gaza. The argument says that for as long as we could keep living our lives, we willfully believed that we could sustain the status quo, keep giving them money, and believe that we were not in danger. We simply refused to see the many signs to the contrary. And as long as Hamas was getting money from Qatar and from Israel, and as long as Israel was providing work for the 20 to 100,000 Palestinians daily, both legally and illegally, we decided that Hamas was not a major threat to us. Because we needed these workers. A third of our construction industry is dependent on Palestinians, and a ban of entry will cost us hundreds and millions of dollars a month. We believed that we could contain them with money. We wanted to believe that notwithstanding that their charter says that they want to destroy us, that we could keep them under control, also because we have such a capable army. And of course, we believe this because during these years, the Israeli economy has been booming, and it's been very easy to want to believe this. In the last decade, the investments in Israeli startups grew, totaling $95 billion. The Israeli startup ecosystem has achieved the highest concentration of startups per capita and twice as many unicorns as in the UK. These impressive figures have placed Israel at the top of the startup ecosystem in the Middle East and in the top 3 countries worldwide. Israel ranks among the top 25 economies based on GDP per capita ranking, above Canada, Germany, New Zealand, and the UK. Our public health system enabled us to lead the world in COVID vaccines because we have a nationalized system and advanced technology. And these are just a few examples of our successes over the last 2 decades. And while we struggle with 20% of the population who have extreme views on the extreme right and on the extreme left, studies have shown that most of the Israeli society actually hold values and positions where 80% of the middle, of the secular, of the national religions, and most of the denominations in the middle actually agree about most of the major issues and of the most important values. So life in Israel was going pretty well, and we thought we had it all under control. So what on earth happened to us this last year? And how come people say that in the months before October 7th, we were on the brink of civil war? How can people who love the same country, wave the same flag, so violently disagree about a subject that has been called the judicial reform? And why is this so terrible that it almost brought us to a civil war, and then on October 7th, it all magically went away, and we came together as a civil society? I think it's important to talk about in order to understand where the country is today. So I need to go back a few months. Okay? So first, I want to go tell you that I'm not a judicial expert. But I can explain it very simply. I, for one, want to say that I think each side really believes that they want the best for Israel. And if I could sum it up as a layperson, I would describe it like this. The ones that don't want any change to the judicial system, to the court system, the ones that are against the reform believe that any change will weaken the Supreme Courts and weaken Israeli democracy. Why? Because they believe that these courts are the last check and balance against that exist in the Israeli system. They believe that the government and the Knesset are basically one and the same, and that the Israeli Supreme Court is really the only check on this power. If any change is made, if these reforms are passed, there's a fear that there could be unlimited and unchecked power. And this is a very real fear. They don't want an authoritarian government. Those are people that were against the reform. The ones that were for the reform were saying that the Supreme Court overreached their powers. They believe the decisions of the court don't reflect the people's wishes. How can that be? Because the judges are too left, too elitist, and they're just people making decisions that don't reflect the will of the majority of the people. And while there are many examples to the contrary, where the Supreme Court made decisions for the right and for the left, what's the pain point? Why do the people want this reform? I'll get to it. Because take, for example, the uprooting of the settlements in 2005, when we unilaterally pulled out of Gaza. There was an attempt to appeal to the Supreme Court to stop the decision, but it failed. So people were uprooted from their homes, and these same people were outraged that the courts didn't protect them. And they vowed that the courts would never have such power again. And it's much more complicated than all this, but the point is that it led to 40 weeks of demonstrations which divided the country. People were passionate about saving the country from a dictatorship, and others talked about the will of the people. Everyone talked about their love of Israel, and we felt the tension every day. And many worried, literally worried, that it was leading us to a civil war. The Azrieli group represents employees across the spectrum. And I realized that our shopping malls could actually be a place where people could connect and communicate because everybody goes shopping. So I'm very proud that we conducted meetings where we set up these living rooms inside our shopping malls, and with an organization in cooperation with of an organization called the Fourth Quarter, hundreds of people started to meet who never would have talked to each other before. Haredim, secular, national religious, but more importantly, they started to listen to each other. I'm very proud of this because what's amazing today is we're all stuck in our own algorithm, in our own TikTok world. We're not listening to each other. And so I was only trying to create a platform where people would talk to each other from various sides of the spectrum. But here's the thing. It's as if none of this is an issue anymore. I'm talking about it today to remind all of us that the divisions in the country are actually still very deep, and they're just under the surface. And we must not let them divide us again, because October 7th happened. October 7th, no matter where you were in the world, you woke up to the horrors of the morning, of the massacres, the burned houses, the terror, the rape, the cries, and the taking of hostages that happened on Israeli soil. And for 11 hours, and I'm going to tell it like it is, for 11 hours we were conquered in the south of Israel, in the villages that are on the border of Gaza and the surrounding areas. There are no other words for it. I need to say it like it is, because I don't want you to think about it any other way. For a few hours, that part of Israel was conquered. And it's an area so idyllic that it's hard to describe it in these terms. The flowers, the orchards, the butterflies, the birds, the beautiful houses filled with peace-loving families. And for those unbearable hours, other than a few heroic units and some soldiers who managed to get there, and individuals who came to the call of duty, and there are tens and tens of incredibly heroic stories, but it's important to tell it like it is, the army and the Israeli government failed to protect its citizens. And during that time, our people, you and me, were burned, beaten, raped, killed, tortured, and other terrible things. But it's also incredibly important to say that in the hours and days after the massacre, was the unbelievable resilient civil society, the same society that was just fighting each other over the judicial reform that I'm not sure everybody really understands the issues, that came together and created one of the most incredible civil society responses in wartime that has ever been seen. Within hours, people rallied, gathered food, clothing, established hotlines, shelters, missing person websites, developed facial recognition software, established hostage family headquarters, logistics, farming and agricultural assistance. People left their houses with nothing and needed everything. They had no ID, no medicines, no glasses, no shoes, nothing. Hospitals needed equipment. They were overwhelmed. Soldiers and citizens who were wounded, the sheer volume of the emergency cases were simply overwhelming. Mada and Hatzalah and horrifically Zaka, who painstakingly recovered Jewish human remains to the fullest extent possible, preserving the honor of the dead and ensuring a full and proper burial, went through years of body bags and materials in hours. The Azrieli Foundation in Israel and Canada immediately donated $10 million in emergency aid for medical equipment to hospitals and rescue forces, psychological support, equipment for soldiers, and for dislocated families and families of hostages. And now we've just issued another $10 million for emergency support in rehabilitation and for trauma for victims. The Azrieli Group, our corporate entity, gave emergency aid for cross-sector collaborations, like hosting small businesses and supporting classrooms for children in the Azrieli Center. And we created army assembly areas in our parking lots just to try to understand what was going on in the country. The army needed places to put its equipment down. We did exhibits in our malls, and we're supporting dislocated families, among other initiatives. There were 120,000 displaced people from 25 communities in the south. And then within days, the government moved another 80,000 residents from the north in case there would be an incursion on the northern border. For the first time in Israel's history, there were literally refugees, people who could not return to their homes within the country. But they were being housed in hotels, you might think, so it's not so bad. This might be the case for a day, or a week, or a month, but people want to go home. It's already been 117 days. And new social issues surface immediately. We needed schools for the children who are displaced, but on the other hand, they just witnessed their friends and family being killed and taken hostage. How can they go back to school? How can they have a head to talk about tests and learning? Who are we kidding? And then we need mental health specialists. We need trauma specialists. We need money for programs. We need the right lists of people so we know who to give assistance to, but the people who can give us the lists themselves have been killed or have been taken hostage. So for the first weeks, there's total chaos. We don't even know who to approach to get the lists to start helping the people who need the help. Utter chaos. Thousands of people have been mobilized for reserve duty, as I know you know. The country has been mobilized for war, affecting businesses, schools, universities. It affected every single household. And there are two fronts, the active southern front and the preparation for the potential war that we're terribly afraid might develop into a much more serious war on the northern front. As of today, there are over 1,400 citizens and soldiers who have been killed. But there are over 11,000 citizens and soldiers who have been wounded. There are over 550 soldiers who have been killed in total. And the numbers are just terrible. Just to make it realistic for you to understand what I'm talking about in a tangible way, because we're saving more lives, but over 700 of the soldiers who are casualties, but now we saved their lives, but they have amputated limbs. Medical advances means we can save lives, but now they've lost an arm and a leg. So think of the recovery required. They have to learn to walk, they have to learn to write, to eat, to play, to do sports, to live in their apartments, to go back to their old activities. It's huge. The young and beautiful Israel needs support in ways that you've never dreamed of before. When we entered Gaza, our military, and we went and started our military operation, I need to tell you all, there was broad consensus in Israel for this just war. There's broad consensus that if we can destroy Hamas, it's worth the terrible price and possibly losing some lives. We all understood what it meant. And then the death toll started. And there's still broad consensus. This is a just war. We want to destroy Hamas, not the Palestinian people, but we never want to be in a position to be conquered in our land again. We want our people who have been taken hostages to come back. Over 240 regular citizens taken from their homes in their pajamas. It's you and me, guys. Mothers, babies, children, grandmothers, men, women, We want them back. There's still 136 people hostage in Gaza today. And at first, the Israeli public was patient and believed maybe there could be some incredible operation, like a raid on Entebbe, which would make Israel great again. 117 days have passed. 223 soldiers have been killed only since the offensive, and people are getting upset. The country is now losing patience. No one expected it to take this long. People are scared. What if the actions of the army in Gaza isn't making enough of a difference? Because Hamas is a guerrilla army hiding in the tunnels, and it's very hard to beat. They can still shoot rockets at us. 2 days ago there were rockets on Tel Aviv. They're still sending us to the shelters. Are we succeeding in destroying Hamas? Where is our sense of amazing Israel? And so I'll say it again. Let's remember how we entered this war. We were terribly divided. And then let's remember what happened. We surprised even ourselves. We came together. We showed heroism, patience, love for each other across all the boundaries. And so we must stay together. We have to be united and not apart. Because if we fall apart, that will be the real victory of our enemies. Finally, I'm no expert, but there are 3 things that I want to summarize about where we are today in Israel. Our concept that Hamas could be bought with enough money and enough work permits and could be convinced by the economic of the Palestinians was totally wrong. We did not understand their ultimate strategic plans or their commitment to their ideological goals. There's a great intellectual, her name is Einat Wilf, and I think she summed it up best when she said that the West has been willfully ignoring the signs that have been in front of our faces for years. We believed what we wanted to believe, that if we give Hamas money and all the resources that we as Westerners would want to build a state, that they would use these resources the way we would have used them to build a state and advance their people's interests. But all the facts point to the contrary. In the years since Hamas has been ruling Gaza, they have received billions of dollars in aid. And yet there's no Singapore that has sprouted up in the seaside resort town, no flourishing research in the universities, no aid from the neighboring Arab countries that we would expect. And how do you explain it? Wilf explains it in a way that I will summarize in 1 sentence. They don't want Israel to exist more than they want a state of their own. And we have been willfully refusing to read the writing on the wall. And in addition, we have indulged in their narrative of the right of return. The right of return of the Palestinian refugees is a claim to a right which no other people in history who have been displaced during a war that they lost over 75 years ago, that they keep sustaining. The truth is that Hamas wants exactly what they say they want. From the river to the sea. They want all of Israel, and they don't want us in it. And to add insult to injury, the UN agency of UNRWA is controlled by Hamas, and so now this whole generation of children have been educated to hate Israel under the guise of an unbiased UN organization. And I'm referencing Wilf because I don't want to take credit for these ideas that are not mine, but I think they make perfect sense. And now I circle back to the conceptia, the concept. The concept that we've been living in Israel, that we can live together in harmony for as long as we keep giving money and work permits and make Hamas happy, and they will make us happy, and maybe we can all be neighbors, and one day live happily ever after, is a concept that's simply no longer viable in Israel today. I just did a tour in Be'eri. The people in the Otev Aza, the peace-loving families of Be'eri, who fought for coexistence, were the first ones who lined up and believed in coexistence. And now they say we can no longer believe in this conceptia. Hamas doesn't want to live side by side in a state with us. They want to destroy Israel more than they want a state of their own. The second point to summarize the conceptions of where we are in Israel today was that we believed that our army could rely on technology intelligence as opposed to human intelligence. And this was a mistake. In the last 20 years, the Israeli army intelligence has become technology-based. The IDF embraced technology advancements, sophisticated border fence sensors, surveillance cameras, high-tech solutions. But think about it. This high-tech superiority in a battle with Hamas, who knew how to go low-tech, they undermined our sophistication, and it clouded the army's vision, and it proved totally fatal on October 7th. It turns out that the antidote to technology is handwritten notes and unsophisticated telephones. We were outsmarted because they dumbed down. And finally, our third conception, which brought us to this point, is that we believed our government would protect us from such a catastrophe. But our government totally missed the cues because it was too busy dealing with misplaced priorities and dividing the people rather than uniting us. The government, the military, everyone was involved in this conception, and everyone missed the cues. But the very definition of their job is not to miss the cues. And certainly their job is not to divide our precious and beautiful nation, the one that we worked so hard to get. And we must not be the source of our own downfall. At all costs, we must stand united from within and from without and protect our state of Israel. And as a grand finale, we all know that to add insult to incredible injury, it only took a few days before the world turned on us and rampant anti-Semitism started. For example, in my home country, in Montreal and Toronto, Canada, which is nothing short of unbelievable, there was pro-Nazi vandalism, firebombing, attempted shootings targeted at synagogues, Jewish businesses, and Jewish daycares. Now, we have been accused of genocide instead of Hamas, who should really be accused of genocide because in their charter they call for the destruction of the Jewish state. How has never again started happening again so quickly? In conclusion, where do we go from here? How do we take it forward to an optimistic place? Well, first, you should know that the strangest thing about living in Israel is the way we live in a kind of anomaly all the time. Even during the most difficult times, it only takes a few days before life takes on a regular rhythm and everything kind of goes back to normal. We go back to buying pastry in the bakery, we sit in cafes, we walk on beaches. It's unbelievable. Although this time it is a little different. We do go out to cafes, but this time we go home at night and we watch the 8 p.m. news and we get an update about what's happening in our just war. And every morning we wait to hear if any soldiers were killed and how many, and was it somebody we knew. And my children, only 17 and 18, they've been to more funerals than definitely most kids their age in North America. And these are funerals of young people who are very close to their age. And it's devastating. But what about this claim of genocide? Have we raised Gaza in a disproportionate way? Have we overshot our targets? Have we intentionally killed Palestinians? Because the pictures in Gaza are terrible. They are. Did we kill 8,000 children? And what's a child? Is a 16 and 17-year-old Hamas fighter a child? I certainly don't want to kill any Palestinians. But I sure do want to destroy Hamas that attacked us on October 7th. And Hamas uses a strategy which has been called the CNN strategy. They kill and terrorize Israelis so that we have to fight back, and then they put civilians in harm's way so that public opinion will turn against us when we counterattack. And then they go hide in their tunnels. People forget that Hamas intentionally targeted civilians on October 7th when they came into a peace-loving community while people were sleeping. I never thought anti-Semitism would really surge in my lifetime. I'll be honest with you, I thought I was overreacting. I was sure that all my survivor narrative was really something between me and my psychologist. I didn't really think anti-Semitism was gonna come back. And yet after everything we've just been through, as a Jew and as an Israeli, I really believe that the lack of acceptance of Israel as a Zionist state and the never-ending refugee status from a war that ended 75 years ago by a people who refuse to recognize the existence of the Jewish state means that we're not quite as safe as I thought. My conclusion is that we need the state of Israel to succeed and represent all the Jewish people now more than ever. But we also need very strong communities in the diaspora communities like yours here in Zurich, more than ever. You would guess that I would say maybe everybody needs to move to Israel, but that's not actually what I think. I think we need really strong communities outside of Israel as well. We need communities who will continue to grow and educate Jewish youth about the beauty of our history, our culture, our songs, our food, and our values. We need communities who will support a democratic and Jewish state of Israel, because we are much stronger for as long as we are together. And that means all of us, inside and outside of Israel. As long as we have our own homeland, as long as we have a place to go, we can fight back, even after a pogrom like October 7th. And I understand that it's crazy to live in fear all the time. I mean, who can do that? And I don't think you should, because there are signs of hope happening, like the Abraham Accords, which could really be a game changer in the region. Economic cooperation, which could create prosperity, which could affect all the players in the region of the Middle East, which integrates Palestinians and Israelis, is a true game changer. This could be a win-win for everyone, but it would have to be without Hamas. And let's not forget that in the meantime, day-to-day life in Israel, it's really still the best place in the world to live, in my opinion. The country is vibrant. There's an amazing social scene, art scene, culture scene, but it's more than that. In Israel, you feel like you're part of something bigger than yourself. It's so much more than a safe haven. It's a place where you feel the entrepreneurial spirit of the people on every corner. It's against the odds, one of the happiest places for people to live, because it turns out happiness, it's about purpose. And purpose comes from building and creating and sustaining our Zionist homeland. Living in Israel is all about purpose. And I want to remind you something. This is super important. You don't have to agree with the Israeli government or Israeli policies in order to believe in our right to a Jewish homeland. You do need to be willing to live with the messy business of building our country, and to take the long-term view of the situation and to stay the course over time. I hope my kids will do a meaningful service for the country. Your kids might go to the army, might go to college, might come to Israel on birthright or Masa. Each of our children can find a way to give back to our homeland from the initial inspiration that really comes from the home. But one of the biggest outcomes from October 7th is that incredible heroism from the leadership that our youth has shown. You know, we talk about Gen Z and the millennials as the TikTok generation, the self-absorbed, individualistic, and frivolous kids, but it turns out that we're incredibly wrong. The young generation is what's giving me the most hope for the Israel of tomorrow. In Israel post-October 7th, the future leaders have yet to surface. It will be some of the young people who have been protecting our country with their bones, their blood, and their skin. They're the new generation of Zionists. The young people who know that we cannot live in Israel the way it's been, but that the true Israel of today is a unified Israel, a melting pot of the different parts of the sectors of Israeli society, including religious, secular, Israeli Arab, Druze, all Israeli citizens who have been fighting side by side to protect our country together at this time. These new young leaders will unite us. This young generation who's fighting shoulder to shoulder, young men and women together, these are the people who are going to lead us to the new Israel of tomorrow. So don't forget, Israel may not be perfect, but never, ever forget that it's yours. So come. Spend time or do something meaningful for your community, because we need you now more than ever. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Danna. I just want to, you offered to do a few Q&As.
Oh, if you want.
I want